All right. Thank you, Lee, and welcome everybody to the Learn Another Approach, Let's Talk Advising webinar. My name is Zahorik, and I'm currently an academic counselor and peer advisor coordinator here at Fox Valley Technical College. I'm the vice president of NACADA and the president-elect, and I've been a member since 1998. So that should give you an idea of how important my membership and involvement in the association is. We're very excited to welcome those of you that are new to the association and welcome back those of you that are joining us continuing members. I found the networking that takes place over venues such as this very valuable in terms of professional growth, and I hope you find the same through participation in today's webinar. At the closing of last year's annual conference, David Spite, our current NACADA president, challenged us to get engaged in NACADA and the advising profession. He also followed up with an article in December highlighting 4 areas of engagement, and those 4 areas are listed on the slide for you and have been the basis for the creation of this entire webinar series. So the board took on the challenge of getting engaged and developed this Q&A series to provide a platform for members and leaders to connect, grow, and learn from each other. The Q&A webinar series consists of 4 webinars that you will see on the screen. The first webinar, Get Engaged in the Profession, Let's Talk Core Values, took place on June 20th. However, you can access a recording of that webinar on the NACADA website if you would still like to join in. And you're welcome to provide feedback by emailing nacada@ksu.edu and put core values in that discussion subject matter, and we'll be sure to incorporate your feedback. On August 24th, you'll have the opportunity to join us for a discussion on becoming a scholar practitioner. Let's Talk Research. That's going to be moderated by Patty Griffin. And through that webinar, you'll have the opportunity to meet and greet Wendy Troxell, NACADA's first Director of Center for Excellence and Research and Academic Advising and Student Success, along with Craig McGill and Kiana Shiroma. Discussion will follow on how to get involved in academic advising research. And finally, on September 6th, we'll focus on getting engaged in the association Let's Talk Involvement. Panelists will discuss how to get involved in the association and answer questions about the work of the divisions they represent. The moderator is Janet Spence, and panelists include Erin Justina, Cecilia Oliveras, Rodney Mondor, and Michelle Ware. So let's get started with today's webinar. We have a panel of leaders who have a breadth of knowledge and experience with utilizing a variety of approaches in the advising professions. So let's do some introductions. Brody, would you mind starting us out?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Brody Broshears. I'm with the University of Southern Indiana, and I am currently a council member and the regional division rep.
Okay, I'm Karen Archambault. I am currently serving as the Dean of Enrollment Management at Rowan College at Burlington County in New Jersey. And for NACADA, I serve as a member of the council as one of the division representatives for the Commissions and Interest Groups Division.
Hi, I'm Tracy Griffith. I'm a senior academic advisor for Upper Iowa University, working with adult learners at our Milwaukee campus. I'm currently a member of the steering committee for the Commission and Interest Group Division, and former chair of the Advising Adult Learners Commission and the Small Colleges and Universities Commission.
And howdy, my name is Rebecca Hapes. I'm from Texas A&M University, and I'm a senior academic advisor here in the Department of Entomology. My NACADA role is the current chair of the Advisor Training and Development Commission.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Although this is a Q&A session, we're hopeful that participants will be able to reach the following outcomes as a result of your involvement today. Whether you're new to the advising field or a seasoned advisor, we hope you'll learn about the importance of utilizing a variety of approaches, dependent on the student audience. Since we only have an hour to introduce the topic of approaches, we'll be discussing a variety of NACADA resources that will help guide you in gathering additional information on a variety of approaches we'll be discussing, and to explore others that you may not have had the opportunity to explore. So in addition to NACADA resources, we will integrate the use of institutional and extra-institutional resources to acquire additional information. We're also hopeful that the knowledge gathering doesn't stop after the webinar today. Rather, you use this opportunity and information as a springboard to begin developing a plan that will assist you in exploring continuous education and knowledge development with a limited training and developmental funds. I can personally share with you that most of the advisor development information I've received has been through the NACADA Clearinghouse, networking with NACADA, journal articles, listservs, all which are free to our members. At Fox Valley Technical College, we're currently implementing a case management model, and all the resources I've gathered are from NACADA friends and family, so I'm very appreciative of that because it costs our college little to nothing. So now I'm going to turn this over to Karen, who will introduce us to our topic today. Karen?
Thanks, Dana. So for as many students as we serve, there'll be different advising sessions. Each time we have a student in the chair across from us, we find a different background, different experiences, different academic plans, and different hopes for the future. So in each of these sessions, advisors need to pull from a large bag of tricks to be able to match the right approach with the student in front of them. So here on your screen, we've listed just a few of the many approaches that advisors may take. So let's take a look just at the first two. In prescriptive advising, the advisor is responsible not only for guiding communication, but also for guiding decision-making. Prescriptive advisors are viewed as having the answers on hand for their students. In developmental advising, on the other hand, the advisor and advisee are partners. They uncover options together, and the two guide decision-making together. Another approach further down the list, advising as teaching, suggests that while developmental advising is broadly defined as supporting growth, advising as teaching specifically focuses on the advisor's role in supporting and enhancing student learning. While certainly one may have a preference for one of these approaches over another, we can all certainly imagine scenarios in which each of these is relevant and appropriate to the student who's sitting across from us. Similarly, the rest of the approaches listed here and others, both in literature and in practice, can be used in different scenarios and are best, perhaps, when they're combined as options, dependent upon the need of the student. As Kimball and Campbell suggest in the quote at the bottom of this slide, those who have only one approach to use when they're working with their students do so at their peril. Those who have a wide variety of approaches and are particularly more adept at supporting the wide variety of students that so many of us see across our campuses. So when we think about the wide variety of approaches, we may realize that we aren't particularly good at working with those different things. We just don't know enough about them. And we'd like to make sure that we're skilled at working with our different students, and that need for skills demands that we go find new resources. So because you're all here today, we're going to make the assumption that you share our belief that NACADA is an excellent source of information and of knowledge. But there are also sources within NACADA and outside of the organization that help us to build our advising knowledge base. There are things we may be less likely to think about. Things on our individual campuses, outside of our advising circles, and these can support us as we try to learn different approaches to advising and to broadly working with our students. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to share some of the resources that can support this discovery.
Thanks. So NACADA provides its members a variety of methods and opportunities to learn about academic advising and to network with others within the profession. So individuals can take advantage of the conference opportunities at multiple levels, hearing from a variety of speakers in breakout session formats. And because of the wide array of topics covered at these events, there's sure to be something for everyone in attendance, regardless of institutional type, size, and population of the students served. Webinars hosted throughout the academic year are additional opportunities for members to learn about a particular topic from some subject matter experts or specialists, and perhaps from the comfort of an individual office or a group viewing environment, or even a packaged CD. And then maybe for members looking for material on a specific topic, they can search in the clearinghouse for a variety of articles related to an advising theme and build some background knowledge and support related to their particular topic of interest. And commission and interest group listservs are another good way for members to gain electronic engagement with others who have similar interests to discuss best practices, relevant questions surrounding their particular interest area, and other timely discussions that may arise in their particular environment. There's no limit to the number of listservs that a person can subscribe to, so this is a really great idea to take advantage of other member knowledge around our membership. The various NACADA publications will also assist members in staying abreast of scholarly activity taking place in the field of academic advising. Members may gain ideas about new approaches, like we're discussing, to implement perhaps within their advising offices that can lead to increased student success.
We often forget about the many things happening on our own campus that can aid us or prompt us to approach advising differently or more effectively. I like to think about the 3 Ps, programming, policy changes, and people, as the prompts for thinking about our approaches to advising institutionally. If you think about the programs and new initiatives that might be happening on your campus, maybe you're integrating a new early alert system that requires your advising staffs to interact with students earlier in the semester. Maybe you're being connected now to a UNIV 101 course that is specifically designed to make certain you're making early connections with students through the curriculum. When we think about policy changes, maybe there's a change to required advising where we have specific things that are happening related to handling course loads, handling advising loads. And then maybe we also have financial aid changes that require us to think about how we schedule students through the classroom. And then finally, maybe we're reorganizing advising, a completely new structure, a creation of new advising units, and we have to think about how are we going to interact with these areas more specifically. How will we create positive relationships? How will we work more effectively?
Other things to think about is how you connect. Does your institution have monthly, quarterly, or annual meetings for advisors? What about Skype or Zoom meetings? Having regular meetings that allow you to connect and learn are important for your advising community. Other potential resources could include brown bag lunch meetings with peers to share information, or sometimes just walking across the hall to talk with a fellow advisor. Think about meeting with faculty to discuss curriculum requirements. That can help you gain greater insight about a program and allow you to advise more effectively. And perhaps talking with staff at the Career Services Office on your campus can give you knowledge of employment trends that may help a student make decisions about his or her academic plan. Advisor manuals that talk about the basics and advising processes can be an at-your-fingertips resource. Normally, these can't be considered a training design or a program for new advisors, but it can be an excellent reference for those new situations that pop up in your advising day. Then there are college catalogs and handbooks. These are important to review at least annually. Policies and requirements can change yearly, so careful review of these publications is critical to effective and accurate advising at your institution. There are many opportunities outside of NACADA in your institution that can advance your career and broaden your knowledge base. What you see listed here is just a sample of some external learning opportunities. While there are commonly costs associated with most of these certifications, they can be done independently and they add value to your career and increase your advising skills. Learning more about advising can also come from just learning more about the systems your institution uses to track students. Is there someone within your department or your IT liaison who can help you increase your abilities to use these systems? Perhaps to develop reports that can help you better assess your advisee's progress. Talking to more experienced peers and asking questions is also a great way to learn. Working with those in or outside your home institution can be an excellent way to learn new advising approaches. However, be conscious of context when getting or giving advice on advising methods or programs, that what works best for one institution may or may not work for another. It's best to take that information and determine how it can be adapted to meet the needs of your college or university as well as the needs of your advising population.
Sorry about that. I forgot to unmute myself. One of the most common concerns that we hear about professional development is that it isn't supported or it isn't available. But what we tend to mean by that is that there isn't money available for us to travel to large-scale annual conferences. When those of us who have budget concerns and have budget control, I should say, look at the budget and we see that it might have gotten cut in a given year, the first things that we look for are often those places where there's a large expenditure. What we also should look for, though, is the way that we can take a small amount of money and spread it as effectively as possible. And sometimes we can find things that are entirely free. So the truth is that there are a ton of ways to get information, and some of them have already been mentioned. But we also want to think about the role of the supervisor. So if you're in a supervisory role, one of the most important things you can do is to look at how you support your staff. Not only, as Tracy mentioned earlier, the brown bag lunches that perhaps advisors put together, but also a supervisor saying, this is what we're going to do this month at our advising meeting, is we're going to read this article in common and have this shared reading time. Additionally, there's no cost to the listservs, Twitter chats, and other social media engagement. These allow you to really step off of your campus without ever leaving your office. It's a great way to connect with your fellow advisors and your fellow professionals. And I'll say for myself, there are social media outlets in which I tend to lurk. I learn more than I share. But I've found that some of those are some of the most valuable places to hear from people whose backgrounds are very different from mine and may look more like my students' experiences than like my own. Without that engagement, I would be left making the assumption, whether explicitly or implicitly, that students had something in common with what I went through when I was a college student. And the reality is their lives are probably quite different from my own. So while we often think of resources from NACADA as well as costing money, we tend, again, to think of that annual conference. We also want to think about those things that have no cost attached, such as NACADA webinars like this one and like others that have no cost at all. And I would like to put in a plug as well for the NACADA Reads offering through the web. We're coming up on the 4th NACADA Reads webinar this August, and it's an opportunity for some sustained professional development that has absolutely no cost except for your time. I mentioned earlier about supervisors taking responsibility for supporting their advisors. We also want to make sure that advisors are taking responsibility for themselves. It's up to each one of us to build our practice and to build our resumes and our ability to speak about ourselves as professionals. And certainly I would suggest and I would argue that there's no one who has stayed in this field long term and has stayed engaged in the field long term without really nurturing themselves as a professional. So we would encourage you to stay on top of trends, to read and read and read. And when we think of ourselves as students as well as teachers, that's a healthy place for us to be in as we think about our own professional development. For example, the very recently Titan Partners, in collaboration with NACADA and NASPA and NACAC, and with support from the Babson Survey Research Group and the Gates Foundation, disseminated the results of a wide-reaching study on academic advising and student success. The research is the largest publicly available study about academic advising and its impact in higher education, and that's just one place to start to consider keeping yourself abreast of the kinds of trends that affect advising every day. Just having a conversation across your campus is a good way to see how you can move your campus and move that needle on having an impact on advising. So, Brody, maybe a final thought from you?
Yeah, I want to add that whole notion of personal responsibility. You know, in my role as an advising administrator, I think we put that personal responsibility for our own professional development as a core value, right? It's tremendously important. We have to reflect on our role within the institutions. We have to maybe ask ourselves, why am I in this field? Why am I an academic advisor? What are the things that I'm really good at? What's my advising style or my advising philosophy? What advising issues are most challenging for me? Maybe even, what do I want to learn this year, right? Is there something that I'm missing from my repertoire that can be improved? And I think this self-reflection can really inform the approach that we take in our own professional development journey, and it helps us maybe set up some of the specific and attainable professional development goals that we might have. A personal example, 2 or 3 years ago, I wasn't in a great place personally and professionally as I was thinking about my role in the academic advising world. And I spent a year really committing to the idea of happiness and meaning making within advising, and really dug into that as a topic. And not only, though, did that provide some solace for me personally, but professionally it created another opportunity. And I've been able to speak about happiness, meaning making with advisors across the regions and even at the annual conference. And I found that to be really productive. And that just came from my own personal interest in looking at advising differently. How can I make better meaning of my work? How can I be a happier person and professional? And I think that's a perfect example of taking that personal responsibility for our own professional development and using that as a means to becoming more involved within NACADA, maybe within our organization on our campus, and even with the staffs that we work with. I think you need to model that behavior of taking responsibility for our own professional development.
Great. Thanks, Brody. Thank you, panelists. So let's take Brody's advice. Let's talk about what kind of things we can do personally on our own campuses, what's going to get us in a better place. If you could go to the bottom of your screen, if you see that Q&A button, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and start submitting some questions that you may have. I do have a couple questions that were submitted a little bit earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and throw those out, but please go down and start visiting that button and put some questions in. One of the first questions we received is, how have any of you integrated advising approaches that address university mission strategic planning goals? Anybody like to take a shot at that?
I'll jump in. The mission and vision of our institution are really core to everything that we do. And we just recently went through a strategic planning exercise on our campus. And I think what mattered to us in looking at that was that it's a relationship that goes both ways. So our advising staff and our advising values informs our strategic plan, and our strategic plan informs what we do next with advising. One of the maybe most important ways that we thought about advising as part of our strategic plan was in really rethinking the concept that had been held at our institution for a long time of advisor as scheduler. And breaking through that was part of the way that we used our different approaches and spoke about advising as teaching especially, and about advisors as educators to reframe how we talked about advising and how we linked certainly the outcomes. One of the outcomes of advising is that students are going to be retained by the institution and they will register for classes, but that's not the purpose of the advising session. And so we really used our strategic plan to encourage that discussion amongst a much broader range of people than otherwise would have been able to have that conversation.
Great. Thank you, Karen.
Karen, if I could just kind of add to that, right? At USI, we went through our first strategic planning process about 5 or 6 years ago, and one of our key goals was increasing the graduation rate. And so I think advising professionals, our University Advising Council, really believed that advising has to play a key role in that. And so I think for anybody involved in advising, when you look at a strategic planning process, I think you have to view that as an opportunity to advance advising as a profession and on your campus to aid students, right? I think the only thing that, and from a system and kind of a logistical process perspective, I would just say, it's important to cast a wide net of stakeholders. We had a lot of folks involved in our process to make certain that everyone was on the same page. We needed upper level administrative support. And certainly there are going to be bumps in the road, but I think it's always good to be aligning advising practice with the university strategic plan. And, so for us, it was really about how do we develop the right campus partnerships? How do we develop advising? How do we make certain that advising is advancing and becoming a critical component of that strategic plan?
So Brody, there's another question that was submitted that I think might build on that, if you don't mind addressing it. The question is, can anyone share challenges, successes, integrating a new model for advising on your respective campuses? And you're talking about partnerships, so could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think for us, on our campus, it was about starting with a good framework for action. So how do we develop systems and strategies maybe that create greater alliances to benefit students, maybe generate a more central understanding of the advising role and the processes that exist on campus, and then providing a more consistent advising experience for all students. You know, and the way that we decided to do that was to look at maybe a more intake-based model by college, so that our first-year students received the same kind of experience through that first year. And we did a really good job, I think, of sharing some of the pros and cons of that model. What are going to be some of the perceived benefits? What might be some of the challenges? And it's impacted, too, in terms of the way that we approach advising. So one of the areas that we're working on even this year that we've really set aside as being an important part of the goal structure that we've set for our new advising centers is, how do we transition students out of the center to their faculty advisor, and how do we get better at doing those kinds of things? And I think that those are some of the things that happen when you change advising approaches, is you have these perceived benefits and new challenges arise. And I think it asks then folks to really get together and try to find ways to best move forward. And any time that I've created a system, I think the final piece is that you have to be willing then to tell a good story and assess the progress that you're making. And so I think that means getting out and talking to faculty, getting out and talking with the other constituencies on your campus that are really interested in student success.
Great points. Thank you. All right, another question. What resources on advising approaches have you found to be most useful for sharing with administrators, advisors, faculty to promote the concept or practice of effective advising practices? Tracy, would you mind taking a shot at that one?
Sure. At my institution, we recently did a complete overhaul of the advising handbooks, combining two rather outdated manuals, one for our faculty advisors, one for our center-based advisors, and took it, tore it apart, put it back together again. Now, a lot of our faculty advisors really were unaware of NACADA, so this for me was a perfect opportunity to talk about the resources available for our advisors, whatever their primary role, and to look at not only the different types of advising, but where to go to learn more. And I think that is one of the best things. Find those opportunities, introduce those new resources, those new advising styles, so that all of the advisors within your institution have the opportunity to learn a little bit more and how to be more effective in their advising profession.
I think for me, there was actually a monograph out quite a few years ago. I will apologize, I don't think it's even in print anymore. But it came out of NACADA, and it was specifically about advising as a collaborative campus effort. And it's something that I've held onto in my brain since I first looked at it, because one of the concepts that was core to it was the concept that not everyone has advisor in their title, but advising needs to be understood across the campus. And when I talk to my director of financial aid, I speak with her about advising and about how advising and financial aid are integrated and how they work together. And I try to use those things that those areas have in common to talk to the heads of those areas to try to get them to collaborate together. I think having a conversation across your campus that is really about advising small a, as opposed to academic advising as a department title or as a mission kind of a goal, or as an individual title, is often very helpful, because when you have conversations with folks across campus, if you have the conversation first that is sort of along the lines of, talk to me about the advising that you've done within your office this week, even if they aren't advisors, it then gives you an in to start to talk about how they can do that work better. So you may start off saying, well, I'm not an advisor, but I have conversations all the time with students about their future plans. Okay, well then you are serving as an advisor, whether it's in your title or not, so let's make you more effective at having those conversations. And I've generally found that to be very helpful to then be able to launch into a whole slew of resources. So really thinking about advising as that collaborative campus effort has really helped me to reframe the way I speak with people who maybe see advising as what somebody else does.
Right. I have to agree with you, Karen. I think it's good to make sure that we are speaking the same language. When I started having some conversations with partners here and found out that a lot of people thought advising was just registration, I realized quickly I needed to back up and start over first. So thanks for that. Okay, next question is, what advising approaches, philosophy have worked best in your experience as an advisor, advising administrator, or NACADA leader? Rebecca, would you be interested in answering that?
Sure. I would say in my experiences at A&M, I believe the majority of my colleagues here are very generalist in our approach to advising, and I think that a lot of my colleagues here on campus do a really good job at adapting the approach to the situation, very similar in the approach to how Karen was discussing it earlier, as to the situation and students as necessary. So we're a large institution and have a fairly decentralized advising structure with some centralization in some academic colleges. So we've got a kind of a unique structure here at A&M. And so I think that I would agree that, as Karen mentioned, like I said, many advisors have tendencies towards certain approaches based on our personal experiences, based on our advising philosophies. But in order to serve our students well, I feel that we need to remember that each student comes into our office with their own set of experiences and circumstances, and we need to be intentional with our interactions with those students and utilize whatever approaches are necessary to reach them where they are and help assist them in moving forward. So kind of an example, an artist wouldn't use the same paintbrush to create a work of art. They wouldn't use the same size paintbrush to create a beautiful work of art. And so in the same manner, we shouldn't necessarily use the same advising approach with all students in which we interact. So each student's coming from a different place with different goals, objectives, and hopefully our interactions with them will ultimately shape them for the better, allowing and enabling them to become the masterpiece that we know that they are intending to be. So hopefully we can help them get to that point.
Rebecca, if I could add to that, I think the idea of learning from other constituencies on your campus to hone approaches is really important. We were able to garner a student support services grant in 2010, and that group was housed in my area for undecided students. And one of the areas where I felt like we needed to be better on our campus was how we work with diverse student populations. And through the work of student support services, they've really created a much more intrusive approach to interacting with students. And while this was an approach that had a lot of success with their 140 students that were a part of their program, what I found kind of as an administrator was this approach is effective with working with diverse student populations, but how do we now integrate maybe that kind of an approach with our first year students more broadly, right? And maybe it wasn't the same number of advising appointments or utilizing peer mentors, but it was about creating a more consistent approach to maybe communicating with our first year students, to making certain that students came in a particular number of times, to being more intentional about how we interact with students through the early alert process. So I agree with you that every student as an individual is going to have a different paint stroke or a different brush, but I also think there's opportunities for us when we find an approach maybe that's worked and we start to interact with other people who've had success on our campuses related to advising. And I think that's another key piece, right? When we start to think about approaches, is just those resources and successes or failures that have occurred on our own campuses.
So as we all know, assessment always comes into the conversation. We do have a question on assessment. How have you assessed the effectiveness of new approaches that you've taken on your respective campuses? Karen, have you had any experience with that you could share?
We're actually in the starting point of launching an entirely new approach to advising, and I say that more small a approach rather than implementing one of these approaches. We've just recently gone through a review by a NACADA consultant. We had someone here on campus for 2 days who made a wide range of recommendations. And we're also going to be launching into a review based on the CAS standards. And our reality here is that we are not meeting the goals for enrollment and graduation that we would like to be. And so when you recognize that, you have to start putting into place, okay, well, what do we do to fix that? And so what we will be looking at over the course of the next few years as we put these pieces into play is really to say, how have we started to move the needle? Have we, for example, we're looking at a much more intrusive model than what we've done previously. Previously, we were of the approach that students wake up, where I'm at a community college, students wake up in August and they decide to go to college when they, it happens to be August 25th, and they say, college seems like a good idea. And I'm saying that somewhat flippantly, but I mean it in terms of where our volume was. And so one of the things that we're starting to put into place is how do we approach our students in a more intrusive way to get them to be able to make their decisions earlier. Part of that is certainly helping them with financial decision-making earlier, helping them with academic decision-making earlier, but also just from the approach of it being more less defaulting to what a student decides to do in August. And so what we'll be looking at really is how are we meeting those goals? How are we meeting not only enrollment goals, but also goals in terms of students coming in and talking to us? How long are our lines? How effective are we from a purely service standpoint? Our second goal will be to look at what is the student satisfaction. That's another important piece. But the third and really the most important is our student learning outcomes. I will be honest when I say we have not had student learning outcomes associated with our advising program. So writing those outcomes and then measuring to them will really be key to us being able to say whether or not the changes that we're making are going to be successful.
All right. Next question. What do you consider when looking at a new advising approach in terms of values, philosophy?
I'll jump in again. I really think this is such an important question because how we advise is so personal to who we are. And for some of us, we can look at the wide range of advising approaches, and we can read something and we can say, that sounds great on paper, but if I myself were to try to put that into effect, I wouldn't feel natural doing that, or it wouldn't work with my students, or my student population looks totally different than the population that this was written for. And so I think when I'm thinking about how do I approach my students and how do I want our advisors to approach our students, I'm thinking first and foremost of what our students' needs are. What is our student population, and not just thinking about them in broad strokes of, well, our student population in general is, but also thinking about how are we reaching those students who we know have been marginalized on our campus, the students who have not been, have been likely to drop out because they haven't been approached in a way that has been effective with them. And then looking at, okay, now when I think about that approach for that student or for that student group, what's an approach to it that feels natural to me, that feels like something that I am genuine about? Because I think that all of us can think about that time when we tried to put on a face that wasn't our own, tried to put on an approach that wasn't our own. And I think being genuine is something that students will respond to more so than they will the fanciest of tools. And so I think that that combination of understanding what students need and understanding what's real for us is sort of core in how I think about what new tricks do I want to add to my tool bag.
I agree with Karen. Not only is it specific to the student population, but it's specific to the student who walks into your office. A lot of times you have to, within the first minute and a half, assess what's going on with the student, figure out what their needs are, and then put together immediately in your head an advising plan that can pull from various different advising approaches to address that student's particular needs. There's no way just one plan or advising approach is going to work. You have to sometimes coach, sometimes nag, sometimes be intrusive or prescriptive, but you also have to encourage that student to figure out the answers for themselves. And it's on the fly. It's knowing that student, and then as the situation unfolds in your office, figuring out what that next step is. What's the next approach to address that next issue?
I'll add a little bit to this coming from a different angle of it as well. I think that the curriculum you're dealing with also impacts these types of decisions as well. I work with two different, very, very differently structured undergraduate programs, and the way in which we work with the students that are in those programs is very different just because of the structure of the program. So that's an additional layer that we really hadn't delved into much in our discussion yet today, but that does impact how we work with the students within each of those different types of programs. So that's just another added layer to the whole mix that we're discussing here as well. And that does impact the way in which you interact with the student as well.
All right. The next question we have is, if you have a multi-tiered advising system or process, what is the best approach to ensure that students receive consistency in information and approach?
I can start that one, and the answer is it's hard. I think we really try within the creation of our new advising centers. We've tried to create a pretty consistent communication system with our new students. We've tried to develop specific ways that we look at our predictive analytics. We've tried to develop a pretty consistent way that we transition students to faculty. But having said that, on our campus, one of the challenges has been every one of our undergraduate colleges does have some unique needs and does have a unique student population and unique challenges related to that student population. So what we've tried to do is to be consistent when we can be, but to also allow for some of those specific needs to be flushed out by the individual advising areas. And I think, again, from my perspective, it's about theming some specific things like, for us, campus partnerships. For us, this idea of advisor development and student development. And honestly, for our campus, even retention numbers play a real big role. And so we want to make sure that we've got some of that consistency. But I think for us to really have the best chance for students to be successful, we have to allow for some individuality within the undergraduate colleges. And then even the transition to faculty advising is even more challenging, I think, because we don't automatically have a united faculty as it relates to how we view advising. And most of our faculty, if not all of them, want to do a good job, I think, but time is an issue, advising loads are an issue. So it's a constant battle, I think, to create that consistency. But from my perspective, it's a goal that we should be striving to meet whenever we can, is how do we create consistency in that process?
And I think I'll add just for a moment to what Brody said. One of the things that we're actively trying to do is to try to recognize the spaces where there is overlap, but also the spaces where there are unique roles to be played by a faculty advisor versus a professional advisor. We similarly have a mixed model. We also have niche programs that have their own advising and counseling, so specifically funded programs. And I think that we have, what we've tried to do is to identify what is the role of each of these people, so that when a student is asking a question, they're getting the answer from that expert, whether they're getting it directly from the mouth of that expert or they're getting it by way of the person they're sitting in front of who is not seeing themselves as the expert. We're recognizing that different people have different levels of responsibility. So when, for example, a student asks a professional advisor about something that's really a deep curricular faculty question, the advisor's responsibility is not to make something up because they don't know the answer, but to reach out to that faculty member and say, hey, I got this question. and this is really pretty deep into your major, and I'm not sure what the best answer for this is. So that's where we're trying to get to, is to simultaneously bridge that space between saying we need to keep information consistent, but we also need to recognize that experts are experts for a reason. And while they should be sharing their information, they also should be recognizing the spaces in which they need to continue to serve as expert.
I know this has come up now in a couple of the questions, but the idea too, when we look at data analytics and predictive modeling, and so I think that impacts kind of the consistency of information and how we work with students. So, you know, on our campus we've used MapWorks, but whether you're using MapWorks or some kind of tool that's specifically related to Levitt's Campus Lab, any of those tools, to me, those are tools that inform practice, but they don't automatically change, I think, the way that we have to work with students. You know, I kind of like this idea that every student deserves our attention, right? But predictive analytics may just change the messages that we send to particular types of students, or it may change the way that we interact with students on the front end. I think the great thing about advising is that when students come in one-on-one, while students bring in maybe different areas, they're not a number or a risk level or any specific kind of model. What they are is a student that needs our assistance. And I think we best understand those students by developing relationships with them, understanding their needs better. And so I think it is important to use some approach. And campuses are creating their own analytics. Whatever you're doing, I think it's responding to that in productive ways. From an administrator perspective, to me, that's the most important. And in some instances, that might be consistent, but even predictive analytics are predictive. They're not guarantees. And I think we need to remember that as advising administrators and as advisors.
Thanks, Brody. So one of the next questions we have is, how do we effectively communicate to our students the importance of advising to success? So no matter what approach we use, how do we effectively communicate that to our students?
I think this is one of maybe the most crucial pieces to our conversations with students, and I think this starts long before our students are in our offices as advising appointments. This is, again, where that cross-campus conversation needs to happen, because we need that conversation to start in our admissions offices, in our orientation sessions. We need students to understand that they're coming into a relationship with the college, not just with their advisor, but with the college, and that part of their role in that relationship is to take an active part of planning out their future and of thinking through the hard questions that advising is going to ask them. I know many institutions have gone the way of the advising syllabus, and I think that's, you know, a great way of trying to demonstrate to students that there are expectations about advising on your campus. We don't currently have one, but it is one of the things that we're looking at, because it helps to explain advising as an educational process instead of just an appointment that they go to get their schedule. And again, I think Dana mentioned it, I mentioned it earlier about that question of students and administrators and the campus more broadly thinking of advisors as schedulers or advisors as registration. And that need to shift that thinking, I think, starts just incredibly early. Needs to start long before they're one-on-one. One of the things we know is that, you know, you get 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe 45 if you're lucky, with a student in an advising appointment. And you can't get to that student if you're spending 20 minutes explaining to them why it's important that they showed up.
Great. So we actually have several questions that have come in about when we have large advising loads and limited advising appointments, 15 to 20 minutes, how do we integrate some of these approaches with such limited time? Anybody have suggestions for that?
I can start on that. With a larger advising load and few advisors, it's important to lay out the expectation early that students before they come in are expected to have that advising audit or advising worksheet handy, to have specific questions in mind, and know that, if you miss the appointment, coming in later, while I might be able to see you, it really does restrict me to just the most important questions. So set up the expectation, make sure they know what tools are available to them without speaking to their advisor, and then come in with those specific questions so that we can take care of business promptly and then hopefully have the time to move on to other areas of concern.
And I'm gonna jump in and repeat myself a little bit on that question of when do students learn about advising? Because I think when you have students who understand what the point of advising is and why they're in the meeting with you, 15 to 20 minutes, while it's not nearly enough time, you're much further along than you are when the student comes in expecting the advisor is going to hand me my schedule for next semester, and instead they're getting what we hope is an educational experience. So I think having that conversation begin with students much earlier, it sets them up better for what to expect. Part of that can be as simple as if you have a line, if you're doing walk-ins and you have a line out the door, handing them something or having something flashing across your TV screens that says, here's what to do right now to prepare for your time with your advisor. Your time with your advisor is limited. Here are the things you want to think about before you go in. And really, I think Tracy's comment about having the student be more prepared really hits the nail on the head in terms of what we need students to do as the part of the partnership in getting us to be able to use effective approaches. I think when the student doesn't do their part, or when we don't prepare the student to do their part, we fall back on being prescriptive. You have to take this, you're going to do this, this is what it looks like, this is how you finish up, and good luck and have a good day. I have 12 minutes to finish this whole appointment. But when the student comes in really well prepared and has good questions and knows what kind of question, the advisor is in the position of being able to pull out a whole lot of different information and be able to ask different questions and to approach things differently, because they do have that space to do it. And I'm never going to say that a 15 to 20 minute appointment is plenty to get anything done, but it's certainly more effective when you can use the whole 20 minutes and not just the 10 that you've got left after explaining all that to the student.
Karen, if I can just add from a systems perspective, one of the things that I would think about just more generally is a peer advising system a possibility, and what might be the advantages or disadvantages of something like that. On our campus, a couple of our centers are utilizing peer advisors, and really it's doing just what you talked about, Karen, preparing students to be better in the 20 minutes that they've got, making certain that they've had some of their initial questions answered, that maybe they've put together a list of 6 to 7 courses. We've done group advising sessions. When I was an advisor at the University of Northern Iowa, we had what were called major meetings, and we would remove holds in batch with our undecided student populations or with students by specific department, and we'd use that meeting an hour 90 minutes where we would sit down with 80 to 100 students and really kind of move through the room, answer some of the specific questions, start to get things moving from an advising perspective. Is that ideal? It's probably not ideal, but given some of the challenges you might face with huge advising loads, the one thing I loved about that process was every student there, if they had questions that they could get answered, we could do that, but we could also remove the advising hold so the student felt good about what they'd put together in that. And we called it kind of homework. And then even the idea of curriculum, right? So we've developed a new core course now, our UNIV 101, and an advisor is connected to each one of those courses. So if you have 300 to 400, is there a way that you kind of inch yourself into curricular kinds of options? Our advisors, we have an advisor connected to every one of those sections. Either the advisor is connected to a full-time faculty member section, or the advisor is actually teaching a section for their assigned advisees. And that's awesome. 2 times a week or a couple of times a month, a student is getting to interact with their academic advisor through that course. And I think that's another great way to maybe handle some of those larger advising loads.
Dana, you're muted.
Thanks. Nobody could read my lips. We are getting short on time here, and I just want to let you know we probably have time for one more question. We'll start with that question, and we'll just see how much time that takes us, and then we'll start winding down here. So one of the next questions we have is, what approaches have you used to engage faculty when utilizing different approaches? How do we use that in training? What's the best way to get them to utilize different approaches?
I think from my experience, one of the things that has been most valuable as an approach when working with faculty has been the advising as teaching model, because it draws, just as when we're working with a student, it can benefit us to draw on things from the student's own experience, things that they understand. Drawing on an advising as teaching model often speaks to the experience of the faculty member. So while they may not embrace, as I said before about, what is core to you, what are your values, what do you understand, you may have a faculty member who you can talk till you're blue in the face about appreciative advising, and it's not going to resonate with them. But an advising as teaching model for me has been effective in working with faculty members because it speaks to what they already understand as part of their process. So they understand learning outcomes. They understand how the student would meet those learning outcomes. And so it translates very easily into a faculty mindset. Certainly, I think some of that is also guided by what kind of faculty you're talking to. Different faculty members in different disciplines. Rebecca mentioned earlier about different curriculum affecting how we approach students. I think different faculty in different disciplines are often guided by different decision making as well. The kinds of things that might have attracted them to what they teach would also change perhaps the way that they approach their students or the way that they approach their advising. And I think where I go to from a core level is that in a conversation years ago about student activities, a friend of mine said, it's not that faculty members don't care about students, it's that they care about students in the framework of what they already understand. So if you have a barbecue, a faculty member might not show up, but if you have a chemistry exhibit, the chemistry faculty is going to show up and support their students. And so I think of this approach as very similar, that if you're speaking to faculty in the language that they understand helps to make what you're saying resonate more easily. Doesn't necessarily mean that faculty certainly are incapable or unwilling to hear other approaches, but I think using that advising as teaching model has worked well for me.
Great. Thank you, Karen. And that is about the end of our questioning that we can take. We had a lot of questions we weren't able to get to. I apologize for that. But that was a good response. So thanks for sending your questions in. I want to thank the panel for sharing with us today. I'm hoping you all learned some new information that you can integrate into your current advising systems and help students meet their goals. So some final parting words. I just wanted to invite you to visit the NACADA website for more information on the additional summer webinars coming up, as well as a variety of web events that you can utilize for professional development activities. I would also like to remind everyone to register for the annual conference taking place in Atlanta, Georgia, October 5th through the 8th, if you have not already done so. Hotels fill quickly for the annual conference, so you want to be sure to reserve your room now. And I will turn this back over to Lee. On behalf of the NACADA leaders in the executive office, thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. What a great time. What terrific answers, multi-layered answers to all of our questions today. To what Dana just said about annual conference, I'd also point out that our fall webinar schedule is up now too as well. So check that out and see what topics that we have coming up for you this fall. Thank you all for being with us today. It's been a great time. And Gary, if you would come back in now and close us out.